Hey everyone, welcome back to What the Fertility. Today we have Diana with us, and we are so excited she's here. She'll be talking about BMI restrictions, which we really haven't talked about or talked about on the podcast really before. So how that is, necessary for medical treatment. She's also going to talk about male factor infertility, as well as IVF or over 40, and just so many different ways of how people prioritize their family building, working with children while being infertile, weight loss measures. I mean, the list goes on. We are so excited you're here, and just to kind of hear your entire journey. So we're so excited you're here, Diana.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to meet y'all. So our fertility journey started shortly after we got married, which was over 12 years ago, almost 13 years now.
Wow.
And I suspected that I was going to have some issues conceiving because I had already been diagnosed with PCOS.
Okay.
And but we decided to go ahead and try naturally anyway. At the time, we were like 28, 29 years old. And before we could be referred to a fertility specialist, we had to try for at least a year at that time. And after over a year of trying without assistance and not achieving any sort of success, we were finally referred to a fertility clinic. And at that time, I didn't know any better. So I went to the clinic that had the highest success rates, that had the most number of doctors on staff. And I just assumed that meant I was going to be getting better care. Um, Spoiler alert, that isn't always the case. I found that out eventually. But anyway, so we go to the fertility clinic, we do a bunch of the initial testing, and sure enough, yes, I had PCOS and I wasn't ovulating on my own. But the other issue that was very surprising to us was that we discovered we also suffered from severe male factor infertility. Specifically, my husband suffered from cryptozoospermia, which basically means he almost had no sperm. Um, so the fertility clinic told us that before they could move forward with us, they wanted us to see a urologist to see if there was anything a urologist could recommend to potentially improve our semen parameters. So we followed their instructions like good patients that we are. Um, and we went to a few urologists actually, and we settled on one that we connected with and who was very optimistic about our future as, potential parents. And he himself suffered from the same issue that my husband had. And so we just felt really confident working with him. And he advised us to consider a surgery to remove what we discovered were varicocele in my husband's testicles. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, it just means his testicles had too many unnecessary veins that make his testes a much higher temperature, which could then cause all sorts of problems to the sperm.
Wow.
And we were pretty devastated, but decided to go ahead and do whatever we needed to move forward. I mean, we were young, we weren't even 30 yet. So we thought, even though this surgery does require a significant amount of recovery time, we felt like we were so young, it was okay for us to go ahead and move forward. So my husband had the surgery.
I'm sure
Sure.
that it was such a hard diagnosis to get, especially because you already had gotten yours, and then you were like, okay, we can then maybe work with this. And then right after you then get diagnosed with male factor as well, he does. And so I'm sure that was so hard for you guys to be both hit with like infertility type things.
Yes, we were very surprised and, to be honest, devastated because um, our semen parameters were so low that both the urologist and the fertility clinic basically told us that they weren't even sure if IVF was going to work for us at all at that time. Um, so we were like, well, then what else is there
Yeah,
after
yeah,
IVF?
it's like the
That's
highest one usually, right? Like that's
yeah,
like,
exactly.
oh my
Um,
goodness.
So a few months after my husband had the surgery, he had to go back to the urology clinic and provide some more samples to see if there were any improvements. And after 3 months, there weren't any. After 6 months, there weren't any. And even a year after his surgery, his parameters had not improved. So we were devastated because the urologist who had been super supportive and optimistic all that time, a year later, after we did not see any improvements, he just looked us in the eyes and he said, I wouldn't go through IVF if I were you. I would just skip to adoption.
Oh my gosh. I ex I like even after then like a year waiting too, like I feel like that is just so much harder because like you were kept getting hopeful and hopeful that something was going to change. And then after like this whole entire time waiting, then to be told that, gosh, that
Yeah,
was so heartbreaking.
yes, it was very heartbreaking. And you're right. For a whole year, we kept having hope that, okay, this test is not as, it's not the results that we were hoping for, but we hope that, we just need a little bit more time to heal. That's what we kept thinking. And so a whole year later, we had plenty of time to heal and nothing had really improved. So we went back to the fertility clinic and basically we went back and we were like, what now? We did everything you told us to do and it didn't work. Are we doomed? Because our urologist sort of made us feel like we are. And thankfully, the doctor at this fertility clinic that we were working with at the time was much more optimistic than the urologist had been and said, what does he know? He's just a urologist. There are things we could work with you, even with such low semen parameters. And they introduced us to the concept of ICSI
Mhm.
or intracytoplastic sperm injection, whatever it stands for.
Yep.
At the time, we didn't know what it was. It was also relatively new in Texas at that time, because remember, this was like over 10 years ago.
Oh,
Um, and they told us it was going to be a very hefty additional fee. But again, we were just determined to do whatever it took. So, yes, the cost matters, of course, but at that time, you were like, well, whatever, sign us up.
yeah.
So then after that, we did some more testing. I think that's whenever I had my first HSG, where they were checking my fallopian tubes to make sure they were okay. Um, and everything came back normal, except for the fact that I had a very high AMH at the time. And they were concerned that when I started stimulation meds, that I would develop OHSS. So they were just being very careful about like which protocol I was going to be put on. And at this time, we knew nothing about anything, honestly. Like we were just going along with whatever our doctors recommended because we didn't know any better. And we assumed that because they went to medical school and we didn't, that we could trust them with our specific unique case. We have since learned that that's not always the case either. They might be an expert in the field of reproductive endocrinology, um, but they aren't an expert in your specific case. And we have learned that over the years since then, which is something I strongly advocate patients to. You have to get out of your comfort zone and advocate for your specific needs, even if they don't always align with what your doctor usually does or believes in. And we've learned that over the years as we have continued this, journey through trying to access IVF. And I say trying to access because we hit another roadblock after, my husband's surgery didn't work. The clinic was ready to move forward with us until one day they weren't. And the reason for them halting everything was my weight. They had me step on a scale and they calculated my BMI, and they had never mentioned it before. I didn't know to ask about this
Yeah.
almost, over a year beforehand. I know now that's one of the first questions I ask at any fertility clinic that we work with. And they told us that they weren't going to be able to do an egg retrieval on me until I lost weight. And the BMI that they wanted me to be at or below would have required me to lose over 100 pounds at
What?
that, which is
They never said anything this whole time. Like, what?
no, no. It basically felt like they were like, give us a call when you lose 100 pounds. We were very upset, obviously. We felt like we had wasted so much time.
Rightfully so. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yes. So then, and then by this point, I was already 30. And as we all know, when we're on this journey, like every year is just like another marker of time that reminds us, like, you're getting older. And this was over 10 years ago.
And no
So
one wants to hear like someone say to you, like, hey, you need to lose weight. I mean, that's not like a good feeling at
no,
all. So, like, that surely that was so hard to hear, also, especially because it's just wanting something so desperately. You're wanting this baby. And then now just another, like you said, like just another roadblock that you would have to go through.
yes. And it was incredibly hurtful, mainly because I felt like, okay, well, I already have, my own infertility issues, but now you're telling me that my body is the reason why we can't move forward, like not because of my husband's male factor, not because of my PCOS, but specifically because of my body. It was incredibly hurtful. And it's something that I wish clinics were much more transparent about from the beginning. I have since learned that many clinics have these arbitrary cutoffs for many different categories, not just BMI. They might have an unpublished AMH restriction. They might have age limitations that they don't advertise openly until you've spent months being on their wait list and then having your consult. And if you don't think to ask these questions at your first consult, you may not find out that you fall outside of their specific parameters until much later. And that's what happened to us. We spent over a year trying to work with them and the urologist, only to be told, never mind, we can't move forward with you. They could have told me that
From the
a
beginning.
long time ago. Yes, exactly.
That is wild. But it's so good that you're saying this, because I feel like I mean, I didn't even know that there could be these restrictions. So like that is so good to know. And I think so many people now hearing that can go into these appointments that like at the beginning and ask those questions.
Yes, and that's what I advise everyone to do. Is I have a list of questions now because we have seen so many different specialists that I ask immediately so that I don't waste my time and or their time either. I just, like I said, I wish this was information that you could just find easily, but unfortunately it's not. So it's something that we as patients have to advocate for and make sure we ask so that we don't waste our own time and money, because that's also part of the equation, is the money aspect for sure.
Right.
So yeah, that was pretty intense, devastating to hear also. And so for the next few years, that's what I focused on, was trying my best to lose weight. At this time, I was a teacher. I was working with elementary school students. I loved being a teacher. It's a passion of mine. I did not do it for the money, obviously. But it was hard. Over the years, it got harder because my students were growing, and I was still not, growing my family. And I was a music teacher too for a few years, and that was difficult because you see the kids throughout their entire elementary school experience. So you might have them as a kindergartner, and then 5 years later, they're a fifth grader. And so to see them develop and grow right before our eyes was just a constant reminder that like we still didn't have that in our life. So that was difficult, not to mention that the field of education is mainly an employment workforce of women. So I was constantly, every year, there were, baby showers because some other colleague of mine was pregnant. And that was difficult because you just have to put on a smile and, attend and be a good sport. But like, you want to go hide in the break room and cry or whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Oh.
getting emotional just thinking about it. Anyway, being a teacher while going through infertility is a lot harder than I realized it was going to be, especially when you're dealing with it for over a decade.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I left the school system. I was in the school system and I left, but like I can't even imagine a decade going by and having those feelings. So I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's also something that I feel like people weren't talking about it back then.
Mhm.
I'm sure that I worked with other educators who were probably struggling with their own fertility journeys as well, but it wasn't something that we were openly talking about. And it just felt very lonely back then for sure. Um, but I didn't know that there were communities online at this time. I didn't even, honestly, to be totally honest, I didn't even know that there were other options. Like, I assumed that the clinic that we had been working with was the best one and the only one we could work with. I didn't really realize that there were other clinics in my local town, much less others in the state, and even more nationally. Um, I made a bad decision of settling for mediocre care due to geographic convenience, basically. And that is something that I no longer do. And I have had to work really hard to find a team that I trust, a clinic that I want to work with, a lab that I also trust. Um, Even if it does mean coming to another state, like right now, I am in New York City because we obtain care in the New York area. And we unfortunately have had to travel here a lot over the last 2 years to obtain this treatment. But we feel like the protocols and the care that we receive here are not available to me locally. And so if I was going to have to travel anyway, why not here with a doctor that I trust and a clinic and lab that I also, trust with our embryos and so on. So yeah, that was, like I said, our journey in the beginning was very rocky and we had to stop everything. Um, I focused on trying to lose weight, doing everything that one does, diets, exercise. I went through this phase where I trained for a marathon. I didn't do the whole marathon, I just did like the half marathon. Hated every minute of it, but tried it anyway. Um, I tried all sorts of diets. Nothing really worked. I even considered medical tourism to obtain gastric bypass surgery, specifically in Mexico. And thankfully, I chickened out, but that's ridiculous that I was willing to go to another country and amputate parts of my digestive system in order to qualify for care that we desperately needed. Um, Not to mention all sorts of issues that would have potentially happened after that surgery that could have impacted my fertility even more,
Yeah.
just so that I could be under some arbitrary weight so that I could get the care that we needed. Yeah, it was a difficult time. My husband and I continued to try without assistance, but we knew that our chances were basically zero because there wasn't enough sperm. We were told that IUI wouldn't work for us, conventional IVF wouldn't work for us, and that the only way it would work was with ICSI. So trying unassisted just didn't, it would just seem like a waste of time, but we still did anyway. Um, so yeah, fast forward to maybe 9 years later, three amazing things happened. Well, I would say two amazing things and one very sad thing. One, my husband got a new job that came with fertility benefits, which we hadn't had before. And suddenly I felt like, okay, I'm older now, obviously, so it's going to be harder. But if we have access to this care, at least financially, then let's see what we need to do to move forward. The other thing is, unfortunately, my mother passed away. It was a sudden illness. She was diagnosed with late stage pancreatic cancer, and just a few weeks later, she passed away. So it was shocking, and it completely turned my world upside down. And it just was a reminder that time is so fleeting, and we didn't want to waste any more of it. So I really focused on doing whatever I could to investigate whether or not IVF was going to be something we could even try. Um, and then the other thing that happened was I met my goal weight, and I say goal weight in like quotations because the goal weight that I had in mind was some arbitrary number that would get me under the BMI restrictions for this clinic, which is dumb because, again, it was not a reflection on my health. It was just to be able to access this care. And I met my quote unquote goal weight with the help of these medications that I'm sure you've heard everybody talk about. In my case specifically, it was Ozempic. Ozempic helped me lose a ton of weight. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes a few years before I started Ozempic. And I had been taking metformin like everyone else does, which is a hard medication to take when you're a teacher because you don't even have the opportunity to go to the restroom most of the time. And I had to go often while I was on metformin, which meant I wasn't always taking my medication, at the right times. But when we switched to Ozempic, I just had enormous success in managing my weight in a way that I had never had success before. And suddenly we found ourselves with all the right things in order to move forward with IVF. So this was about 3 years ago. So
I hear you say that you had really stuck with one clinic based off the BMI restrictions. And it's so interesting from my perspective. The clinic that I got a second opinion at, they said BMI restrictions ridiculous. It's not an actual significantly known factor to make a difference between the effectiveness of IVF. So they didn't have them either. So I hear you say you switched to Ozempic from metformin. Are you now at a clinic that didn't have the restrictions, or at that point you were still at this clinic that said you have to be here?
Great question. Yes, I stayed with the same clinic because, like I said, back then I was uninformed and I assumed that success rates were the end all be all of all things, not fully understanding that oftentimes success rates are artificially inflated and they they do that by turning away certain patients with either certain BMIs or AMH or even age or even just the way they respond.
Or reoccurrent loss. I just resonate so much with that. That was my first clinic. They had these BMI restrictions. They said if you had over X amount of miscarriages that you weren't really a candidate for their IVF. And so I had gone to a second opinion clinic because that was my story. And the clinic I went to had none of those restrictions. And they told me, well, that's because that's why they're number one in the state, but it's because they're cherry picking their cases.
That's wild.
Yes. And I didn't know that. And I think a lot of people who start their journey with IVF also don't know that. And I mean, first of all, we are all limited in our fund, or many of us are limited in our funds, or even those of us who are lucky enough to have IVF benefits or fertility benefits. We are limited in how much, how many rounds we can do before we hit our lifetime caps or whatever. So of course you want the best bang for your buck, and there's no clinic is going to tell you our success rates are high because we turn away patients like you. Of course not.
Yeah.
But
another clinic might tell you.
Yeah, right?
I'm sorry for derailing, but I found so much. I was really excited for you to come on and speak on this subject. And from what I've heard so far, it's been really empowering, especially for others listening, that I've had several friends that have gone to a clinic and they're like, you're not a candidate. And it's like, what do you mean I'm not a candidate? I'm infertile and I want to have a kid. So
and I will give you money. Just get me a baby. Come on. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we're 3 years. You've switched from metformin to Ozempic. This is 3 years ago, and at this point, you're still with your original clinic. So I guess what occurred from there?
Well, honestly, having access to fertility benefits opened my world. I felt like the infertility industry was now my oyster. I didn't have to settle for a clinic that was close by or had high success rates, or I had friends who had success there, especially because as I became more open about our journey, my friends did too, and I learned that our cases were not the same. So why was I choosing a medical team based on their success if we didn't even have the same issues? And I think a lot of people do that too. They're like, oh, well, I heard this doctor, made my friend have a baby, so maybe they'll help me. But if you have totally different diagnoses, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. So we went on like a tour of different fertility clinics in our hometown, which is Austin, Texas, and unfortunately, we had to put ourselves on wait lists because there's not enough fertility clinics in the area that we live. But we waited, and because I had already had the terrible experience of finding out way too late that these clinics had BMI restrictions, that's when I started creating my own little list of questions I was going to ask immediately so I wouldn't waste anybody's time, specifically our time. And I went to a doctor who has a very popular podcast and YouTube channel because I was like, oh, she must know all the things. And again, hit some roadblocks with her in our initial consultation. I went to another doctor who had also very high success rates, but I learned very quickly why he had such high success rates as well. And so we ended up deciding, which is such an ironic thing to admit, to stay with the clinic that had turned us away so many years ago, with a different doctor, a newer doctor. She had started working with them a couple of years beforehand. We felt like a really good connection with her, and she seemed open to trying things that I at the time was only starting to learn about. And because I was under their arbitrary BMI limit, I wasn't worried about suddenly waking up and being above their limit, which turned out to be an issue, but we'll get to that later. So we moved forward with treatment with them. And we went through one round of IVF completely blind without any information. We just followed whatever she recommended. And it wasn't until after the fog lifted from that first round of IVF that I realized, like, I kind of went into this blindly. I didn't even know what medications I was putting in my body or what they were for. The clinic didn't really do a good job of educating the patient. And so I had to educate myself after the fact. And in doing so, I learned about all different kinds of protocols that might work differently for people. I learned about plus-sized people in IVF care and how sometimes intramuscular injections work better than subcutaneous, and just a bunch of things. Plus, my husband and I went down the rabbit hole of all things male factor and how we could improve our outcomes, because our first round of IVF resulted in 0 euploid blastocysts. And it was devastating because we had waited so long for all of this care to finally have access to it. And then for it to fail was just heartbreak on top of heartbreak.
Yeah.
Because at this point, it's been what, like 11 years or something like that?
Yeah. At that point, it was like 10 years at that point.
Wow.
And we were devastated. Not to mention that the doctor who had initially been, super great was starting to be very firm on her recommendations that I needed to consider donor conception. She actually mentioned donor conception at our consultation, and nobody had ever even looked at my eggs in the microscope at this point. But again, like I said, they went to med school, not me, so I assumed this meant that I could trust what they were saying.
She wasn't recommending sperm donor. She was recommending an egg donor.
Yes, because of my...
God.
Yes. I was 39 at this time when we went through our first round of IVF, and she was suggesting that because I was already 39, there was a big chance that my egg quality was going to be poor, and that if we wanted to like skip the potential of failing IVF to consider donor conception. We were not there yet. We were like, excuse me, we haven't even tried yet. Can we at least try?
Here finally. Yeah.
Yeah, can we like try with our, sperm first, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
So after that first round, when it failed, we were incredibly devastated, and started to question whether or not she was right. Like, maybe we do need to consider buying donor eggs, because she claimed that donor eggs could basically overcome everything. ICSI would solve everything plus donor eggs is what we were advised. And I have since learned that that's not necessarily the case either, especially when you are dealing with such severe male factor. And one of the things that we learned is even though we had fertility benefits, donor eggs were not covered. So it was going to be a huge a huge financial investment on our part. And so if we were going to move forward with that, I needed to be sure that we did whatever we could on the sperm side of things to try our best to have success, because I did not want to end up paying multiple tens of thousands of dollars on donor eggs and then it also fail.
Right.
And I had this gut feeling that there was so much more to our puzzle that needed to be, figured out. And it wasn't just going to be fixed with donor eggs. So I went ahead and decided to do another round of IVF. At this time, I assumed this was going to be my last round. I say that in quotations because I have done so many more after that.
Oh my goodness.
I have completed 10 rounds of IVF since then.
Oh my
Total.
goodness,
Wow.
Diana.
That
Yeah.
is the definition of an infertility warrior. Oh
100%.
my gosh. Good
Yes.
for your persistence. Wow. Okay. So this was your second round.
Yeah, second round. And before we started the second round, we started to butt heads with our medical team. And the reason is because I didn't feel comfortable moving forward with the second round doing the same thing. I thought if we did this again, it wasn't going to work again. Why do the exact same thing? And they would tell us things like, well, it was just bad luck. And, we don't always know why it doesn't work. And I get that, but I didn't feel comfortable moving forward. So we advocated for additional interventions on the sperm side of things. Specifically, I had read about how you can sort sperm can help improve your outcomes if you are dealing with male factor. I suspected that my husband, in addition to suffering from cryptozoospermia, we suspected that he also had high DNA fragmentation
Girl,
because
you are my girl. This is what I think. No, seriously, this is, and if you know about sperm DNA fragmentation, you've done your research because they don't talk about it. And this is what I think my husband has, or my husband thinks he has. I'm very intrigued. Okay.
So, we advocated for the test. Like, can we just have this test? And I still, to this day, do not understand why my doctor pushed back on this test. Her reasons were all over the place, including we're saving you money, but you're not saving me money.
But you're not, because we could do all of this if there's a different route. Okay, so this is so interesting. They don't offer the test. I know that. Is it because it's like newer and is it maybe not scientifically proven?
So the main thing that I have learned, the reason why clinics currently do not recommend sperm DNA fragmentation tests at the beginning is because one, ASRM recently said you don't need that unless you have recurrent pregnancy loss or multiple failed IVF cycles. And there's like a list, but I don't believe you should go through that list or suffer through that list before you get access to this data.
Right. And I think, isn't it because the man sample can change every single time? Is that why? Okay.
The man change. And the other issue is that there's 4 different kinds of sperm DNA fragmentation tests. And every company that offers the test, they will give you your results, right? And on the results, it'll tell you oh, you are at this percentage and you are borderline or you are severe or whatever. Nobody can seem to agree on the certain percentages, like a cutoff. Like if you're above,
you have it or you don't. And so probably everybody comes back with a bit of DNA
borderline.
maybe.
Yes, everybody's told borderline, whatever. So I just was like, can we just have the test so that we can know? Because if he has high DNA fragmentation, then I read that there are things we can do in the lab that can help us out. And she was like, I don't think that's necessary because you're doing ICSI anyway, and ICSI fixes everything, which we have since learned is not true, especially if there is high DNA fragmentation in the sperm. So,
And for listeners, ICSI is just where they're made, like your husband would get, or the partner gives a sample, the male partner gives a sample, and they're picking out the sperm that they're going to put into the egg, like under a microscope. So to your point, it's like, well, even if they were fragmented, we're picking out the best of the best under the microscope.
Yes.
Quote
And that
unquote.
was what we were explained, was that, you know, they're going to pick the best sperm anyway to inject directly into your egg. So doing all of this extra testing isn't really going to do anything. But what I've learned since is that you cannot physically, with your eyeballs, tell if a sperm is DNA fragmented, because the DNA fragmentation happens in the head of the sperm. And there could be a sperm that behaves normally, looks normally, does everything it's supposed to, and still be DNA fragmented. And we just don't have the technology yet to tell if one is or isn't DNA fragmented without destroying the sperm. So the people inside the lab who are picking the sperm to fertilize your egg, they're taking a chance that the one that they selected may or may not be normal. And what I've learned is that if you fertilize an egg with highly DNA, like a sperm that has DNA fragmentation in it, one, the egg will not fertilize sometimes. If it does fertilize, the embryo does not become a blastocyst. I learned that a big sign that you're dealing with DNA fragmentation is that potentially your embryos start arresting after day 3. And we already had that data from our first round. And so we were assuming that that was what we were dealing with. And like I said, our doctor pushed back and said, you know, I don't think it's necessary. And I was like, I don't really care if you think it's necessary. Like, we're willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
Can we please do the test? And she said no. And then finally I said, okay, fine. If you won't do the test, can you at least make sure that the lab sorts my husband's sperm by using this one microfluidic chip that I read about that can help overcome DNA fragmentation? It's called the Zymo.
This is just wild
stuff, right?
Yeah, because that's so scientific. And it's like, I'm the patient, and can you do this?
Yes, can you please? I even would print out. I wasted so much paper, but I was still teaching, so I like use my my copier at work. I would print out the studies so I could be like, you know, this is why I'm asking for this. I didn't just like read this on Reddit or whatever. Like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And so she asked the lab if they could use the Zymote device, and they made it at first. They made it seem like, yeah, we do it all the time. So we were like, okay, let's do this. But she pushed back again and said, I don't feel comfortable doing that with the lab unless there is DNA fragmentation. So how about we test him first?
You're like, what I've been asking for, but okay, thanks.
Yes. And if it's high, then we will move forward with the Zymote chip, which was so frustrating, but whatever. I was like, I'll take it. So my husband went and did the test. He went to a lab in Austin where they could do it in-house so we could get the results back quicker. There's many different ways when you take this test. Some places will ship you a container and you can ship that container back so you can do it in the comfort of your own home. We just decided to do it locally because we didn't want to have to wait. Because we had waited so much.
You've already waited. I'm to see the definition of waiting. I've heard you say wait so many times.
And we had a follow up with our doctor, and she broke her bedside manner when she admitted to us that it was the highest they had ever seen. And that we were right. My husband had incredibly high DNA fragmentation. At the time, I think it was over 60%, which would mean like if they only found 10 sperm, which they probably only did find 10 sperm, he had such low sperm count, you know, over half of them were
wow.
And so we were like, okay, that's just another thing we have to overcome. So now can we use the Zymote chip?
Told you so.
The lab that had pretended that they had so much experience with it actually said, we don't feel super comfortable using the Zymote chip. So before we say yes, can we do a trial run? So they had us pay for 2 Zymote chips, one for like a trial run.
They should have done the trial run.
100%.
Yes, but they had us pay for it. So we paid for 2 Zymote chips. And my husband, a few weeks before I started my stimulation cycle, he went in and provided a sample, so they could basically do a trial run to see if it works, to see if it's possible to use the Zymo chip with my husband's sperm. And we were told that it worked fine, that they felt comfortable moving forward. And so then we got the green light to do our second round of IVF. We felt very good. We were like, okay, we have changed some things, changed the protocol, changed things in the lab. Hopefully our outcomes will be better. We move forward. I go through stims. I have my egg retrieval. I wake up and I think they got like 13 eggs or something. I was happy with the number. But after I wake up, the person who was working as the embryologist that day, because again, this is a huge clinic. They have like 12 doctors on staff, which means they have a ton of people in the lab that are, working different days of the week. This person on this particular day admitted to us that she did not feel comfortable using this Zymo chip, so she didn't. She sorted my husband's sperm the typical way, and they were going to let us know, in 24 hours what the fertilization report was.
That seems like it should be illegal.
I was about to say, yeah, that's like a lawsuit right there. Oh my gosh.
Well, we didn't do anything to like pursue any sort of lawsuit or anything. We were just shocked.
Sure.
And I was groggy from, being asleep from my surgery. So I just remember thinking, like, is this real life? Like, we worked so hard to get to this point, and they just decided that I don't have a lot of experience with this thing, so I'm just not going to use it. Like, that's not your decision to make.
Exactly.
And it was too late at that point.
Yeah.
So a few weeks later, we get our results, and we find out that we made one day 7 euploid blastocyst. We had one blast, and we tested it, and it was euploid. So we were excited, but still really upset because we just kept wondering, what if they would have sorted the sperm differently? Could we have had better outcomes? So my last round, which was second round, turned into not my last round. That's when we were like, we're done with this clinic. What else is out there?
Yep.
And I went down the rabbit hole of ways to improve egg quality, ways to improve sperm quality. Now that we knew for sure my husband had DNA fragmentation, I was determined to find ways to circumvent it. And we have found ways. There is a really helpful guide that you can find on PubMed. It's free. It is literally called Sperm DNA Fragmentation, a guide for clinicians. I printed this out and gave it to basically every RE I've worked with since then.
I love it.
On it, there are 7 things that they recommend that you can do to help mitigate the amount of sperm DNA fragmentation that you have. And it varies from like least severe to like a surgery. And like I said, my husband had already had a surgery. So we were like, okay, we'll do the diet change. We'll do the hormonal injections, because he did. We went to many different urologists, and we found a reproductive urologist, which is a little bit different than a typical urologist. And this reproductive urologist has really changed things for us, which I'll get to in a second. But after my second round, I found my way to New York City to pursue ovarian PRP. Ovarian PRP is an experimental treatment where they take platelet-rich plasma from your blood and they inject it into your ovaries with the hope that it will awaken any dormant follicles or potentially improve egg quality. And it has been shown for sure to improve like egg count. Like, so many women who were retrieving very few eggs after PRP will oftentimes retrieve many more. It doesn't always necessarily translate to better quality, but we still need more data on that. But I was willing to try anything. And that's how I ended up in New York City. I came here to do ovarian PRP, and the doctor who I was working with, he was really interested in our case. I told him about our experience being turned away because of my weight. And that's when I found out his clinic did not have a BMI restriction. And he told me the same thing, that BMI restrictions are basically dumb. They're just a way of like discriminating against people and he had a good point. He said, fat people have been having babies since the beginning of time. And we don't knock on their doors and say, you can't have a baby unassisted because you're too fat. Like, why are we doing that to patients who need IVF or, fertility?
Wow. Yeah.
So it was like music to my ears. And
it was probably also like a bit of grief though, for all of those years that you on a day-to-day basis were making these lifestyle changes, trying to meet someone's mold that really was made up.
Yes, it was. It was I was definitely, you're absolutely right. I was definitely hit with an enormous amount of grief because I thought, why didn't I find him sooner? I could have started this journey so many years ago. And also, I would have stopped beating myself up for all those years if I would have even been exposed to this opinion, because back where I was from, that was not the case. I was made to feel like something was wrong with me rather than something's wrong with the industry for having these arbitrary cutoffs in the first place. So my husband was the one who said, I want him to be our doctor. And I was like, that's going to be hard. But we changed our lives and decided to go ahead and make this happen. So last February was my third IVF cycle, but we did it here in New York. We rented an apartment for a month, which was fun and expensive. And we did a whole round of IVF. And unfortunately, I responded really well, but my trigger shot failed. So we did not have good outcomes. So we came back in April and did another round. We did much better that time. This time in April, we didn't rent an apartment. We discovered a website called Trusted House Sitters, which is a subscription-based website that grants you access to people who are looking for somebody to take care of their pets while they travel. So that's how we can afford to come to New York all the time. In fact, right now, I am in somebody else's home taking care of two adorable little dogs for free, living in their home while they are in Australia. And I have the ability to live here free of charge and go to the clinic as often as I need to.
That is
you sharing all of
incredible.
You sharing all of this is going to help so many women just like know like there are free options. And look, like you don't have to just take like your doctor's advice at like face value, and you sharing your story. And unfortunately, the 10 plus years that you went through it, I think anybody that was in your shoes 10 years ago today that listens to this episode, you're going to save them so much time and pain and grief, and provide this opportunity that there are other options out there, inclusive of you're not also financially restrained. Like, thank you so much for sharing the details.
I'm happy to share, because I know that for us, it's a privilege to be able to travel for treatment, but it's also not financially feasible if we were paying for everything. And New York is an expensive place to visit, period. To live here, it's even more expensive. And to live here, to be here for a month at a time or so, which is what we do, is incredibly expensive. But this particular website has helped us out tremendously. We have also been able to explore different parts of New York that we wouldn't have otherwise. So that's been really great. We are so in love with New York. We want to live here now, but
I love that.
we'll see what happens. But yeah, this is where we've been working. We did 3 additional rounds last year with our doctor and clinic here, but we did not get a single blastocyst. I was 40 years old. They used a Zymote chip, by the way, by default. So we felt really comfortable with everything, but we still couldn't get past we weren't making anything after day 5. Everything was dying in the lab, and we were really upset and we didn't know what to do. And our doctor here was basically telling us, you just got to keep trying and hopefully it'll work. And even though we love him to this day, we still work with him. I felt like it was foolish for us to keep doing the same thing over and over again without trying something different. So back in Texas, we found a reproductive urologist, and he tested my husband for all sorts of things, found that he had very high DNA fragmentation, just like we had confirmed before, and discovered that he still had a varicocele in one of his testicles, even though we had them removed, over a decade before at that point. So he said, if nothing else is working and you can wait for a few months, maybe you should consider the surgery. He did not recommend it because of my age. I was already 40 years old. But at this point, we had literally tried everything, including ovarian PRP, which I had thought was kind of extreme anyway. So why not? So my husband went under the knife a second time. And it worked. 4 months after his surgery, he had, he provided a sample, and his DNA fragmentation was in the normal range. So below 20% at this time.
Wow. Oh
Our
my
urologist, our reproductive urologist, believes that anything above 20% is considered severe. So that's his cutoff. And like I said, every person has their own cutoff. So we were really happy to see it under 20%. Plus, everything else improved. So much so that we were convinced the lab confused his sample with somebody else's. We literally went to 3 other urologists and provided samples just to confirm our results, because we were like, there's no way. Nothing has worked. And now you're telling me that I have like almost normal sperm? Like, what are you talking about? We were that crazy. My husband went to 3 different, we call them nut huts. That's what we call the room where they deposit the sample.
Wait, that's the best thing I've ever heard. That is so good.
He went
That's
to 3 different nut huts and confirmed that everything was pretty much almost normal. Like, we could almost try, I mean, not necessarily unassisted, but like we could even qualify for IUI one day if we wanted to, which was
Right.
crazy. And then while my husband was healing from his surgery, I still felt the pressure of the fact that I was about to turn 41. Everybody tells you that, like, that time period, like your eggs just die and you have none or whatever. Not necessarily true, but I was really paranoid. So I, thankfully, because we had the insurance benefits, I went ahead and did egg preservation cycles while my husband healed. So we just froze some eggs that we were going to then thaw when he was ready to provide a fresh sample. That happened in January. We thawed my frozen eggs plus some fresh eggs, fertilized them with my husband's sperm using the Zymote device. And for the first time ever, we made 4 blastocysts.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness. That's amazing.
And of those 4, 2 of them were genetically normal.
Oh, that's amazing.
So we were like, what? In February, exactly a month later, I did another egg retrieval, and we made 2 more blastocysts. And then in March, we did a final round, my round 10. And we made 2 more blastocysts. So
My goodness.
we only had the 1 euploid and a low-level mosaic from before my husband's second.
And you never transferred that one?
No, we kept it on ice because we didn't feel comfortable moving forward with transfers. And so we had at least 2 is what we were hoping for.
Okay.
2 genetically normal blastocysts for 1 child, just in case, because we know that, sometimes you have to go through multiple embryos before it works. So that's why we ended up doing 10 rounds, because we were trying so hard to create blasts. But we have had success ever since my husband had his second surgery with the reproductive urologist. And it's not just that. He did a lot of other things, like he abstained from alcohol, he changed his diet, he lost a lot of weight. All of that helped as well. But we really believe that addressing DNA fragmentation up front is what really changed things for us. And the only regret that we have is that we didn't address it sooner. And I wish that somebody along our journey would have pointed this out to us, maybe the urologist 10 years ago, anybody. But no, we discovered this information just because of the kind of people that we are. Like, we are incredibly motivated people who
Clearly
mind to something, we want it to work. And this is the one thing in our life that we just haven't had success with. So we approach it the way we approach everything. And we've given our all to this. I left my job as a teacher to focus on this. So I've been out of the classroom for over 2 years because, again, traveling for care while teaching would not be possible if I were in the classroom. We've sacrificed a lot to go through all of this, but ultimately we've learned so much. And one of the things that I like to do is I use my Instagram to share everything that I learn, because I don't want people to end up making the same mistakes I made throughout, these multi-year journey. And the biggest thing that I've learned is that you are going to be an expert in your particular case. at the end of this. And nobody knows your body or your history. I mean, because honestly, how many of us have been on the other side of the desk with one of these doctors who is reading your chart for the first time while you're in the room?
Yep.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
They don't have the time to necessarily comb through your giant medical history before they meet with you and have any sort of advice. So it's up to you to, like, what I do is I show up with literally like a bulleted list of like, here's a summary, because I know you're never going to read through the 100 pages I sent you. And this is what we need. And these are my questions. And I'm just very much straight to the point now, because there is no other person who's going to do this for me. I will say that I feel confident that through this journey in the infertility world and the medical field specifically, I feel like if either of us, or if our future child or whatever, ever has any sort of medical complication, I am ready to tackle that with the same kind of energy that we've tackled this. Like, I will not settle for mediocre anything, especially when it comes to our future child. Like, I will travel wherever I need to get the best care. And I feel like we do that with every other aspect of medical care. But for some reason, when it comes to fertility, we're just settling for whatever is geographically convenient, and we shouldn't. We should tackle it the same way we tackle cancer, for example. We're all wanting to go to the top oncologist that'll help, save our family member. We should do the same when it comes to our very unique, specific fertility issues. Like, find the clinic and the doctor that's going to work for you and who can help you, and don't settle for anything less, because there's just, as we all know, time is of the essence in this particular field of medicine. And just, I wish I could have gone back in time and like taught myself these things.
Yeah.
Over 10 years.
Your story and this message has been incredible. It's been extremely touching to me. And like, I feel like I want to revisit DNA fragmentation. Can you share with our listeners your Instagram handle? I am almost just positive people are hearing DNA sperm fragmentation for the very first time. And this is going to be very helpful. So do you mind sharing your Instagram handle or any other resources where people can find you?
Yes, I am on Instagram. My Instagram handle is IVF done my best. Like, I've done my best.
But I love it.
But
I love it.
So it's IVF _done _my _best. Also, my name is Diana Zucknick. You can just Google me and you will find that we've been on NPR. My husband and I were followed around by an NPR journalist once to go over our fertility journey. We are also on other publications, so you'll find me through there. I am an open book. I'm not a medical professional, I need to say, but I feel like I have learned a ton, and I have no problem sharing what I've learned. I'm not gatekeeping any information, because if our story can help others' story be just a little less traumatic, or if we can help in any sort of way, like, we are up for it. So yes, please reach out. I would love to hear y'all's stories. I would love to hear your questions, and I will point you to all the same resources that I had to find along the way that have helped us. And to be fair, we are still child free. We have not successfully even tried yet a frozen embryo transfer, but that's what we're doing next. Our next step on this journey is I retired my ovaries. They have a name. They're called Mona and Lisa. They are retired.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny.
After 2 rounds of IVF, they are ready to rest. And we are going to focus now on preparing my mind and body for embryo transfers. And hopefully one of these, I think we have 6 blasts now. Hopefully one of these will represent our future baby, and we'll be able to close this chapter at some point in the future. But yeah, it's been a crazy long journey. We've learned a ton. And like I said, I just want to share our story with anybody, because I know how it feels to be isolated, to feel ashamed of, your body. Why isn't it working the way it's supposed to? Why is it this size? Whatever. And I have since learned that there are options, and you don't have to settle or wait.
What a beautiful journey. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us.
Thank y'all so much for this platform is amazing. Y'all were a resource for me when I first was trying to get as much information as well. So I thank you so much for dedicating your time and energy to such an important cause.